We speak of enlightenment as a gift, but in the cataclysmic shadow of the eternal void, knowledge is a parasite. It consumes the host from within. Welcome to Vane's Reach, the venerable archive, a purgatory of data where ignorance is the only true armor against the encroaching dark. Here, millions endure a tragically necessary attrition, mechanized servitude transcribing the celestial ledger. They spill their genetic vitae into the hungry logic engines. Silence is a blasphemous sacrament. To speak a forbidden syllable is to invite kinetic fury. The gargoyles wait, absolute and unforgiving sentinels of the unspoken. Loremaster Kyros bore the ultimate weight, the omniscient burden of the fallen, a terminal cynicism born from a billion unheeded cries for help across the sector. Every rediscovered fragment was not a beacon, but a heavy stone added to the burial mound of our transhuman physiology. He knew the terrifying truth. But the archive harbored a semantic plague, the index of the warp. It did not conquer with physical carnage, but through the agonizing desecration of the intellect. The words themselves became a heresy, a ritual of summoning that shattered the structural integrity of the Imperium's faith. The truth was irrevocably tainted. Then came Inquisitor Stern, the embodiment of mathematical suicide. He did not arrive to save the scholars, but to deliver the absolute final sanction. He carried the instrument of total erasure, a calculated expenditure of human assets. To deny the enemy its victory, history itself must be violently expunged. Stern advanced with absolute authority, his adamantium plating immune to the silent dread. He came to enact a systematic mind-wiping of the entire celestial ledger. Kyros understood the grim equation, a mathematical suicide designed to starve the Semantic Plague. But to erase Vane's reach was a nihilistic surrender to the encroaching dark. Below them, the infection escalated. The Scribe-Thralls suffered an agonizing bioalchemy, their mechanized servitude hijacked by an abyssal force, turning their sacred task into pure heresy. The index of the warp unleashed its final phase. No physical weapons, just the sheer carnage of corrupted knowledge, tearing through the viscera of the faithful. Stern prepared the final sanction, viewing the massacre as a calculated expenditure of human assets. But Kyros refused this tragic attrition. He sought an impossible catharsis. From the depths of the archive, he unearthed a miracle, the ancient encryption key, a brilliant salvation that promised to purge the blasphemous plague without fire. He merged his transhuman physiology with the ancient core. The erratic tremors ceased. For one fleeting, cataclysmic moment, the Loremaster believed he had outsmarted the eternal void. Even the Inquisitor paused. The viral logic bomb remained dormant. It seemed the surgical desecration of their history would not be required today. But wisdom is merely a sophisticated form of spiritual torment. The key was a decoy, a master stroke of deception designed to lower the ultimate firewalls. The illusion shattered. The firewalls collapsed, offering a tribute of crimson upon the soil. The great cleansing of Vane's reach had officially, irreversibly begun. The abyssal tide could no longer be stemmed. The Semantic Plague claimed the venerable archive, twisting their mechanized servitude into a pure, unforgivable heresy. Stern's mathematical suicide was thwarted. The Inquisitor realized too late that systematic mind-wiping is entirely useless against an omniscient corruption of the soul. The celestial ledger demanded a tragically necessary attrition. Kyros saw the only path left, a dark catharsis born not of logic, but of absolute fire. He descended into the purgatory of the lower vaults. Around him, biological systems failing under kinetic fury became a mere backdrop to his final, terrible duty. The Prometheum Reserves, a slumbering, cataclysmic force. To ignite it was a blasphemous act against the Imperium's history, but a sacred duty to its fragile future. He embraced the ultimate martyrdom. His silver bionics strained against the iron wheel, sealing the fiery fate of 1 billion unheeded voices in the dark. The flames surged, a surgical desecration of the moon itself. It was not a defeat, but a calculated expenditure of human assets to save the sector. The Semantic Plague screamed as its host burned. The viscera of the library turned to ash, offering a final tribute of crimson upon the soil. At the epicenter of the cataclysm, the Loremaster found his peace. Clutching a blank parchment, the silence of absolute ignorance finally granted him absolution. He became the mad burner of Vane's reach, a cursed savior. For sometimes, the only way to protect the dawn is to plunge the universe into darkness. The Ordo Xenos observed the cataclysmic glow. To them, the eradication of the venerable archive was merely a calculated expenditure of human assets. Stern's viral logic bomb was rendered obsolete. The true, systematic mind-wiping was achieved through a dark sacrament of absolute fire. The kinetic fury of the ignition left nothing but silent ash, a nihilistic victory over the encroaching dark. The purgatory of data was closed. The gargoyles were silenced, their watch ended by a tragically necessary attrition. The Semantic Plague was starved of its host. The abyssal infection burned away in a terrifying surgical desecration of history. Across the sector, a sudden, omniscient emptiness took hold. The celestial ledger was gone, the tether to their past violently severed. The Imperium demanded a scapegoat. The tragic attrition of the scholars was framed not as salvation, but as pure, unforgivable heresy. They embraced the comfort of ignorance. The great cleansing ensured their blind faith survived the invisible carnage of the soul. Kyros' final catharsis remained hidden among the stars, a testament to the ultimate martyrdom of the transhuman intellect. We survive in the dark, for the light of absolute truth is a radiant flame that reduces the seeker to inevitable ash. The Ordo Xenos sealed the truth behind adamantium doors. The history of the venerable archive was subjected to a complete and systematic mind-wiping. Stern knew the mathematical suicide was averted, but the cost was absolute. The eternal silence of the void was a dark sacrament to their survival. A new generation embraced their mechanized servitude. They blindly recorded a sterilized history, unaware of the tragically necessary attrition that secured their fragile existence. The name of Kyros became a blasphemous curse. The masses were fed a narrative of pure heresy, a necessary lie to maintain the imperial order. The dead moon remained a guarded purgatory. Any who sought the lost celestial ledger were swiftly returned to the eternal void under kinetic fury. Yet, the abyssal infection is resilient. A single, omniscient fragment survived the cataclysmic fire, a microscopic seed of the Semantic Plague waiting in the dark. The response was immediate, a calculated expenditure of human assets. The scholars spilled their genetic vitae, ensuring the carnage of the past remained buried. It was a localized catharsis. The agonizing bioalchemy was halted before it could spread, a silent testament to the brutal vigilance required to survive. Kyros embraced the ultimate martyrdom, so humanity could endure its blind march. He understood that in a nihilistic universe, the only armor is ignorance. The viscera of the truth was burned away, a surgical desecration of history. We live in the comforting shadow of his unforgiven sacrifice. Long before the Great Cleansing, Kyros was a scholar of pure faith. He believed the venerable archive was a beacon, untouched by the abyssal dark. He sought to illuminate the Imperium's history, but the pursuit of omniscient truth is a dangerous sacrament. It invites an agonizing bioalchemy of the soul. The anomaly was subtle, a blasphemous mutation of syntax. The words themselves began to harbor a cataclysmic sentience, a whispering heresy within the ink. The mere exposure triggered a tragically necessary attrition. The scribe spilled his genetic vitae, his mechanized servitude forcibly terminated by the unseen carnage. Kyros was overwhelmed by the omniscient burden of the fallen. A psychic purgatory where the silenced voices of a billion dead demanded a terrible catharsis. To endure the Semantic Plague, he required a systematic mind-wiping of his own humanity. He embraced an agonizing bioalchemy, stripping away his fragile organic form. His sight was replaced by cold logic, a calculated expenditure of human assets to shield his transhuman physiology from the relentless kinetic fury of the warp. He fortified Vane's reach. He became the architect of its suffocating silence, a nihilistic defense against a universe that weaponized the very concept of knowledge. Yet, his terminal cynicism was absolute. He knew the adamantium walls could only delay the inevitable. The Semantic Plague was already inside the viscera of the library. Thus, the keeper of the unspoken word was forged, a tragic guardian destined to perform the ultimate surgical desecration upon his own life's work. Consider the Scribe-Thralls, a microscopic tragedy within the macrocosm of the venerable archive. Their mechanized servitude was absolute, bound by an unforgiving kinetic fury. They were the expendable flesh, a calculated expenditure of human assets to fuel the logic engines. They lived entirely within a silent abyssal purgatory. Deprived of voices, they could not scream as the Semantic Plague seeped into the parchment, their transhuman physiology breached by the sheer carnage of corrupted syntax. The agonizing bioalchemy began at the fingertips. The blasphemous words infected the mechanical quills, turning their sacred task into pure heresy. The system demanded continuous output. As their biological systems failed under kinetic fury, the logic engines ruthlessly extracted their final tribute of crimson upon the soil. The Semantic Plague bypassed the intellect and hijacked the transhuman physiology entirely. A terrifying, surgical desecration of their fundamental singular purpose. The adamantium sentinels reacted to the anomaly. The gargoyles recognized the heresy, dispensing a tragically necessary attrition to contain the localized outbreak. A localized catharsis. The infected unit was erased, but the survivors continued their mechanized servitude, blind to the cataclysmic shadow falling over them. Kyros observed this nihilistic cycle. He knew that for every purged anomaly, 1,000 more silently bloomed within the viscera of the library. The omniscient burden was clear. The systematic mind-wiping of single individuals was no longer enough. The great cleansing required absolute, unfettered fire. High above the purgatory of Vane's reach, the Ordo Xenos maintained their silent vigil. A cold, calculating eye watching the abyssal infection spread. Inquisitor Stern viewed the venerable archive not as a sanctuary, but as a liability, a mathematical equation where the variables demanded absolute zero. His sensors detected the agonizing bioalchemy below. The Semantic Plague was no longer contained. It was a blasphemous eruption of the soul. He initiated the systematic mind-wiping protocols, a calculated expenditure of human assets to prevent the omniscient carnage of the warp from escaping. The weapon descended. A localized catharsis, designed to perform a surgical desecration upon the planetary data core and silence the history forever. But the abyssal force defied pure logic. The mathematical suicide was interrupted. The logic bomb was consumed by the heresy of corrupted syntax. Stern witnessed the impossible. The kinetic fury of the warp neutralized his ultimate sanction. The Semantic Plague was omniscient, adapting to their execution. The viscera of the library was fully weaponized. The Thralls spilled their genetic vitae to rewrite the physical laws of the orbital engagement. The Inquisitor recognized the failure of sterile technology. A tragically necessary attrition could not be achieved cleanly from the safety of orbit. He abandoned the venerable archive to its purgatory, leaving Loremaster Kyros to find a much darker, much older form of catharsis. The Inquisition retreated into the eternal void. Their departure was a silent acknowledgment that the Semantic Plague was truly omniscient. The venerable archive lost its physical anchor. The immaterial influence twisted the very geometry of the room into a blasphemous sacrament. The heresy manifested, not as flesh, but as a towering monument of corrupted syntax, demanding a tribute of crimson upon the soil. Kyros offered no kinetic fury in return. He understood that engaging the entity was a mathematical suicide. He sought the deep dark. The only path left was a descent into the purgatory of the lower levels, where the final, cataclysmic answer lay. The silent sentinels were broken, their vigil replaced by a continuous, screaming broadcast of sheer carnage into the minds of the damned. The infected systems begged for his genetic vitae. They sought to pull him into their mechanized servitude, to share the omniscient burden. He severed his tether, a surgical desecration of his own nervous system to isolate his mind from the abyssal infection. He left the light of lies behind, descending into a nihilistic silence, preparing for the tragically necessary attrition of an entire world. The core awaited, a slumbering beast of pure energy, ready to deliver the ultimate catharsis and cleanse the viscera of the infected stars. He gripped the iron wheel. To turn it was to initiate a calculated expenditure of human assets on an unprecedented planetary scale. The Prometheum reserves pulsed like a dark heart, a nihilistic sacrament waiting to cleanse the venerable archive in absolute, unforgiving fire. But the Semantic Plague followed his descent. The abyssal infection seeped through the adamantium walls, desperate to halt the great cleansing. Weeping, ceramite seals manifested on the wheel itself. The omniscient entity whispered blasphemous promises to his exhausted transhuman physiology. It was a final, psychological carnage. The heresy demanded his surrender, offering a terrifying illusion to spare the viscera of his beloved library. But terminal cynicism was his greatest armor. He rejected the heresy, committing his silver bionics to the tragically necessary attrition. The adamantium locks shattered. A single drop of fuel fell into the void, a microscopic prelude to the ultimate, cataclysmic event. The spark caught. A violent, surgical desecration of the subterranean stasis vaults. The fire was not a weapon, but an instrument of pure absolution. The flames instantly eradicated the corrupted syntax. The sheer carnage of the ignition incinerated the immaterial influence before it could even scream. As the fiery purgatory embraced him, the Loremaster finally achieved his dark catharsis. The burden of the celestial ledger was erased forever. The cataclysmic ignition expanded, a localized catharsis rising from the dark, melting adamantium, and delivering a tragically necessary attrition to the lower levels. The purgatory of data was breached. Logic engines suffered an agonizing bioalchemy, their mechanical hearts failing under the sheer kinetic fury of absolute fire. The infected Scribe-Thralls found their release, a calculated expenditure of human assets. Their mechanized servitude ended in a blinding, instantaneous sacrament. The abyssal infection within them screamed. The fire delivered a surgical desecration, burning the heresy entirely out of their transhuman physiology. The flame reached the venerable archive. Millions of rusted data scrolls ignited, offering a final tribute of crimson upon the soil of the burning moon. The adamantium sentinels shattered, their silent vigil broken, utterly consumed by a nihilistic force that demanded a systematic mind-wiping of the entire sector. The celestial ledger, the source of their omniscient burden, was reduced to ash. The blasphemous truths erased in a terrifying, beautiful carnage. The index of the warp thrashed. The entity realized that a mathematical suicide was the only true countermeasure to its omniscient corruption. But the cataclysmic flame was absolute. It dragged the Semantic Plague back into the viscera of the inferno, denying its escape. Vane's reach began to fracture, a planetary surgical desecration unfolding in the cold void, a testament to the devastating cost of survival. The planetary surgical desecration reached its cataclysmic zenith. The crust shattered, a tragically necessary attrition to seal the abyssal breach forever. Molten adamantium drifted into the eternal void. The venerable archive was instantly transformed into a dead, floating purgatory of silent ash. At the core, Kyros embraced the ultimate martyrdom, his transhuman physiology breached entirely by the radiant flame of absolute truth. The lenses that witnessed a billion tragedies finally dissolved, a dark catharsis earned through sheer unrelenting carnage of the self. He held the blank parchment to the end, a final testament that true wisdom requires a systematic mind-wiping of all blasphemous history. The omniscient entity was utterly eradicated. Its agonizing bioalchemy completely failed against the kinetic fury of a faithful burning heart. Far away, Stern observed the birth of a dying star, a mathematical suicide achieved without the need for his sterile codes. He marked the sector cleansed. The mechanized servitude of millions was written off simply as a calculated expenditure of human assets. The moon collapsed, a nihilistic implosion that scattered the burning viscera of 1 trillion corrupted data scrolls across the uncaring stars. Silence returned. A dark sacrament was completed. The universe was safe once more, wrapped tightly in the comforting armor of absolute ignorance. Centuries passed. The Imperium built towering monuments of faith upon the silent ashes of the venerable archive. A new history was forged, a sterilized narrative, free from the abyssal truths that once demanded a tragically necessary attrition. Inquisitor Stern was deified. His intended mathematical suicide was entirely forgotten, replaced by a myth of pure, righteous, kinetic fury. Yet, shadows of the celestial ledger remained. whispers of a forbidden purgatory where a madman performed a surgical desecration upon his own world. The response was absolute, a calculated expenditure of human assets to ensure the Semantic Plague never breached their transhuman physiology again. The heretic spilled his genetic vitae, a minor, localized catharsis to protect the comforting illusions of the sleeping masses. The true holy site remains an empty void, a nihilistic monument to the ultimate martyrdom of a singular, brilliant mind. The omniscient burden was burned away. The viscera of the truth was reduced to silent, floating iron in the eternal dark. The final blasphemous sacrament was a blank page, the only absolute defense against the creeping, invisible carnage of the warp. We survive because we do not know. The great cleansing was a gift. The tragedy of Vane's reach is the absolute armor of humanity. The celestial ledger was erased. The Imperium marched forward, fueled entirely by a continuous, systematic mind-wiping of its own dark genesis. Ignorance became the ultimate sacrament. To seek the forbidden truth was to invite the abyssal plague back into the viscera of the faithful. Their mechanized servitude ensured safety. Never again would a scholar's transhuman physiology be breached by the omniscient burden of an unredacted history. Even Stern slept in suspended denial. The mathematical suicide he once authorized was buried beneath centuries of glorious, fabricated dogma. Yet the myth lingered like a phantom ache, a whisper of a terrifying catharsis spreading through a galaxy built on comforting lies. Such whispers were met with absolute kinetic fury, a calculated expenditure of human assets to prevent a localized, agonizing bioalchemy of the intellect. They curse him as the mad burner, a heretic who embraced the ultimate martyrdom to commit a surgical desecration upon their collective soul. They do not know of the blank parchment. They do not understand that the absolute void was his final cataclysmic gift to mankind. The last remnant of the venerable archive burned in silence, a microscopic tribute of crimson upon the soil of the eternal dark. Kyros knew the ultimate truth. Knowledge is a parasite, a radiant flame that reduces the seeker to inevitable, silent ash. In a universe where the abyssal dark constantly encroaches, the only true armor against the heresy of the warp is an empty mind. His was a tragically necessary attrition, a man who loved the history of the stars so deeply he had to destroy it to save them. Let the scholars of the New Age read their sanitized texts. Let them believe they are safe from the sheer carnage of corrupted syntax. They do not comprehend the nihilistic reality. Every word they write is merely a delay of the great cleansing. The Semantic Plague is infinitely patient. It waits in the spaces between the letters, hungry for the genetic vitae of the curious. Survival is bought with deliberate blindness. We trade our enlightenment for another day in the suffocating purgatory of existence. He was the archivist of dying suns. He witnessed the end of all things and chose to be the executioner of his own legacy. Better to die in the comforting darkness of lies than to be cast into oblivion by the blinding, freezing light of an unforgiving reality. The unspoken word remains unspoken. The celestial ledger is closed forever. The Imperium of man endures. May we never remember what we lost